This is a presentation about the experience of work in low-paid sectors in Ireland, and it will look at the gender perspective of such work and employment. Just to give you a brief overview of what I will talk about today is, first of all, just a very brief overview of the large picture. So I'll look at a couple of graphs to give you background information and statistical data on average earning per sector, and then how it reflects in the proportion of women working in low-paid sectors, and then brief look at the gender and low-paid occupations. And that data comes from Eurostat and CSO, it's publicly available. The next and the main part of this presentation will look at the detailed picture, which comes from two projects that I have been involved in a couple of years ago. One of them is working conditions in Ireland, and the other one is social implications of precarious work. So it's qualitative interviews with individuals who are employed across different sectors of the Irish economy. And it wasn't looking particularly at the low pay employment, but we did have a lot of respondents who could be classified as low paid workers. So starting with the bigger picture. I'm sure you've seen a lot of graphs today, but just to remind ourselves is that there is a big discrepancy between those who are on the top of the earning scale and those who are at the bottom. And you can see that for some sectors, such as information and communication or financial sector, people earn more than 1,000 euros on average per week, while in sectors such as accommodation and food, it will be below 400 euros. So there's a big difference. And you can see also that I've put the green line on the all economic sectors, which is the average across all economy. And then you have 5 sectors which would have average pay lower than that. And immediately what brings the attention is that, for example, human health, administration, wholesale and retail, and accommodation and food services, which could be regarded as female work, actually show up in those categories. And just to draw your attention to other service activities, that's, for example, hairdressing is there, so it's a very broad sector. How it reflects on gender, again, for example, accommodation and food services, health and social work activities, you can immediately see that the proportion of women is not only higher than the proportion of men working in the sector, but it's also higher than the kind of darker line there, which is the all nice economic sectors. But these are aggregated big numbers. And when you look into those sectors in details, you get different category of workers, different category of people on different occupational structure, and different jobs that people do. So both the proportion of men and women here, of course, differ in terms of certain jobs and in terms of wages. So just to zoom in for a second into those details, and if you look at the subsector that is called social work activities without accommodation, it's massively overrepresented by female work, and that's childcare, for example. Retail trade, except of motor vehicles and motorcycles, that's just normal shops. Again, overrepresentation of women, same for accommodation, food and beverage activities, and services to building and landscape activities, which is basically quite a lot of that is cleaning services. And in terms of occupational group, that's quite interesting as well, because you can see that, for example, for childminders, that's for the formal childcare sector, virtually no men work in that sector. But women also are overrepresented as cleaners and domestic workers, waiters and waitresses, housekeepers and related occupations, that's hotels and accommodation, as well as sales and retail assistants. And the final graph here on the right-hand side is showing you the average earnings, which are way below the average earnings in all nice economic sectors. And the lowest here is the food and beverage activity, which is below 400 euros per week. So these were the big numbers, but what I would like to focus on today are the qualitative interviews, which represent the stories behind numbers. So what I will move on next are basically quotes from real life interviews and lived experiences of low-paid workers. I'll use examples from 3 occupational groups. First, from hospitality sector, which is restaurant and bars, and then accommodation services, namely hotels. And the second pair of examples will come from childcare, specifically from early education professionals. And there are some important themes that we can observe in those interviews. Quite importantly, the nature of work and the working conditions, the question of wages and how do we calculate wage and how much of work is actually unpaid, then the reality of low-paid work and what you are not being able to afford from your salary, and finally, a brief look at the difference between the value of work and cost of services. So first of all, what comes in the interviews is that low-paid employment is quite often hard and demanding work. I'm not going to read the whole quote, but as you can see, this is an example from an accommodation assistant who worked in a 4-star hotel, and she talked at length about how many rooms per day she needs to do and how much more actually is demanded as time goes by. So in the beginning, they had 7 departures and 10 stayovers, then they had 10 to 12 departures, and then on a bad day, it actually ended up being 14 to 15 departures, and also the manager added on cleaning the corridors, all in the same 5 hours per day that she had. So it's quite demanding and also quite physically demanding as well, all the things that she had to do and all that is involved in cleaning of the hotel rooms. But quite often we have to remember low-paid work doesn't mean low-skilled. And a perfect example here comes from the early years education, where employees are now required to have higher and higher qualifications. Here, there is the early years education professional describing how different FETAC levels give her different privileges. So she has to have at least FETAC level 5, but that's not to be on her own in the room. If she wants to be on her own, then level 6. And then for the higher pay cap, as she said, you have to have level 7 at least. So as she said, even if you get all the qualification, it is not represented then in your wages. There's also a lot of unrecognized and unpaid work. This quote comes again from another early years education professional who was very frustrated with having to do a lot of so-called non-contact time that was next to impossible, as she said, for her boss to give the time as paid. As you can see, she did 60 hours at the end of the year that she did not or could not be paid for. And all that makes the value of this kind of work even lower. First quote here comes from a fast food restaurant worker who describes how after a while, the managers stopped paying for the cleaning time, as cleaning time, according to the managers, had not been recognized as working time. So as she said that they needed 2 hours to do the cleaning properly, but they told them to clock out after 1 hour and then finish up for free. Quite importantly, this pay is too low to make a decent living. The girl who worked as a fast food restaurant worker, she had problems with her bills, but then she went on to tell me about her medical problems. And here is what she said. I wasn't able to afford the medication I required for my condition. And then everything to do with contraception went out of the window as well. It's quite a striking quote here, but she was not alone. And amongst our interviewees, there was a lot of people saying that they are worried that they won't be able to afford medication or visit to a doctor. And the final slide here, I would like you to draw your attention to the fact that all those services are quite expensive. Think about how much parents have to pay for childcare, for crashes. Our childcare fees are one of the highest in Europe. Think about how much you have to pay for overnight stay in a 4-star hotel in Dublin, and think about how much you pay for food in restaurants. And it is not recognized in wages, but it is recognized by the workers. Here, the childcare professional talk about how she knows that parents feel ripped off, but what can you expect? And you can be guaranteed that the workers are actually on minimum wage while not being treated well. So the most important issues here is that working in low-paid jobs can be demanding and hard work. It's not recognized in good wages, but it also doesn't have to be low-skilled. Qualifications are more increasingly required for a lot of jobs, but there is a lot of unpaid work in it, a lot of unpaid time. The low-paid workers often feel undervalued, underpaid, and exploited, and they can't afford decent living. They also don't have many opportunities to go up the occupational ladder because their supervisors and managers don't earn that much more, or actually have more duties. And of course, not all low-paid work is done by women, but the majority of workers in these occupations that we talked about here are women. These jobs are traditionally regarded as women's work and are undervalued, but they're really jobs and deserve good working conditions and decent wages.